I lived alone for 10 years until my wife's sister came to my bed with her forbidden desire. He had lived alone for a long time, longer than he could even remember. The small house at the edge of town had become both his comfort and his prison. Every morning he would wake up to the quiet hum of the world outside, birds chirping in the early sunlight, and the distant sounds of children playing in the streets. Yet inside there was only silence, broken occasionally by the ticking of the old clock on the wall or the creak of the wooden floorboards under his feet. At first, being alone was a choice. Grasp. He enjoyed the freedom of not having to answer to anyone, the peace of eating when he wanted, sleeping when he felt tired, and spending hours lost in his thoughts or reading books that fascinated him. He could spend entire days on the porch, staring at the sky, watching the clouds slowly drift by, imagining the stories they carried. For a while, it felt like a kind of happiness that only solitude could give. But as months turned into years, he realized that life in complete isolation had its price. He missed hearing another human voice, the sound of someone laughing, or even just the gentle hum of a conversation. He found himself talking to his plants, giving them names, and sharing the small details of his day, just so he could feel like someone was listening. Even the neighborhood dogs, who would sometimes wander into his yard, became companions in a strange, quiet way. His work kept him busy, though. He was a writer, and the solitude gave him the focus he needed to create stories. But even his passion sometimes felt empty when there was no one to share it with. He would write pages and pages, only to put them away in drawers, never sending them anywhere, never letting anyone read them. It was as if his life was a book that no one would ever turn the pages of. Friends and relatives had tried to reach out over the years, but he had politely refused invitations. At first, it was out of shyness. Then, it became easier to say no than to explain why he preferred being alone. He told himself that solitude was better, that he could manage without anyone else, and that he didn't need company. But deep down, he knew that part of him longed for connection, for someone who could understand the silence in his heart. Some days were harder than others. Winter mornings were the worst. He would wake up to frost-covered windows and the cold seeping into his bones. On those days, he would sit by the heater with a cup of tea, staring at the snow outside, feeling the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. He sometimes imagined what it would be like to share these quiet moments with someone else, to have someone sit beside him, sharing a blanket, talking about anything and everything, or simply enjoying the silence together. Even so, life had a rhythm that he had grown used to. He knew the sounds of his house, the way the floorboards creaked in certain spots, the small noises that told him when someone passed by outside. His days were structured around his routines, writing in the morning, walking in the afternoon, cooking simple meals in the evening, and reading before bed. Every week, he would make a trip to the market, exchanging a few words with the shopkeepers who knew him well enough to notice if he seemed sad or tired. One spring morning, everything began to change. But he was in the garden, tending to his flowers, when he noticed a letter slipped under his door. It was unusual. He rarely received mail that wasn't bills or advertisements. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting was familiar in a strange, nostalgic way. He opened it carefully, and inside was a note from someone he hadn't expected to hear from in years. It spoke of visiting soon, of wanting to reconnect, and of sharing time together. His heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to feel. Part of him was nervous, unsure if he was ready for company after so many years. Another part of him was curious, excited even, at the thought of someone entering his quiet world, breaking the long-held silence. He spent hours pacing the house, imagining how it would feel to have another presence, to have conversations, to share laughter again. It was a mix of fear and hope, uncertainty and anticipation. As the days passed, he prepared for the visit. He cleaned the house more thoroughly than he had in years, dusting shelves, sweeping the floor, and arranging the furniture neatly. He cooked extra food, planning meals as if a guest would be joining him, feeling a strange thrill in the idea that he would not be alone for even a single evening. The house, which had been silent for so long, suddenly seemed alive with possibility. Finally, the day arrived. He could hear footsteps approaching from outside, and a nervous excitement made him pace back and forth. Breaths. He wondered what it would be like to open the door and see a familiar face, to hear a voice that had not been in his life for so long. His heart was pounding, and he felt a mixture of fear and joy, unsure of how to act, unsure of how to welcome someone after 10 long years of solitude. When the door finally opened, he saw her standing there. She smiled, a smile that carried warmth and memories of a past he had almost forgotten. In that moment, the house no longer felt lonely. For the first time in a decade, he realized that life could change, that even the quietest corners of the world could be filled with laughter, conversation, and connection once again. It was a beginning he hadn't expected but deeply needed. The long years of living alone had prepared him for this moment, teaching him patience, self-reflection, and the value of small joys. And now, with the arrival of someone from his life, a new chapter was beginning, one that promised companionship, shared stories, and the possibility of rebuilding bonds that had been dormant for far too long. The days that followed her arrival were unlike anything he had experienced in the past 10 years. The house, which had been silent and still for so long, now felt alive with sounds and movement. Her presence brought a new rhythm to the mornings, a liveliness that seemed to seep into every corner. She would move around the kitchen humming softly, the sound carrying warmth and familiarity that reminded him of times long past. For the first time in years, he felt the comfort of shared space, the kind of simple companionship he had not realized he missed so much. He watched her as she went about her tasks. There was something calming about the way she arranged things, the way she paused to notice small details, like a flower on the windowsill or a stray leaf on the porch. It made him see his home differently, as though it had been waiting all this time for someone to notice it, to give it life again. Even mundane tasks like washing dishes or preparing tea became moments of connection, silent but meaningful exchanges that filled the emptiness he had grown so accustomed to. They spent hours talking, and those conversations became the highlight of his days. She asked questions about his life, about his writing, about the small routines that had carried him through years of solitude. He found himself opening up, sharing stories that he had never told anyone, stories that had been tucked away in the corners of his mind. She listened with patience and interest, encouraging him to remember, to reflect, and to see the value in his own experiences. Her curiosity and kindness created a space where he could be vulnerable without fear. Evenings were particularly special. After dinner, they would sit by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. He had seen many sunsets alone, but this time the colors seemed brighter, the moments more vivid. Pass. She would tell him about her own life, about the paths she had taken and the challenges she had faced. Listening to her, he realized how much he had missed the simple exchange of stories, the comfort of knowing someone else had walked through their own trials and joys. With her around, laughter returned to the house. They would laugh over small mistakes in the kitchen, over clumsy moments, or even over stories from the past that seemed funny in hindsight. It was a sound he had almost forgotten, a sound that lifted his spirits in ways he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in a long while, he felt that sense of ease, the simple happiness of sharing life's small moments with another person. Breath. Yet even in these happy times, he noticed subtle changes in himself. Being with her reminded him of emotions he had buried during his years of solitude, feelings of hope, of longing, of connection. Sometimes he would catch himself staring at her, realizing he had forgotten how much he valued the warmth of human presence. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, unsure how to navigate this new chapter, but determined to embrace it fully. They began to establish new routines together, Mornings were for tea and conversation, afternoons for walks in the nearby park, and evenings for reading or sharing stories. He introduced her to the quiet corners of his world, the garden where he grew flowers, the old bookshelves filled with his writings, and the small trails behind his house where he often wandered. She, in turn, brought new energy, introducing ideas for cooking together, decorating the house, or planning small outings. The home that had once been a place of solitude was transforming into a place of life and shared memories. Through their time together, he discovered more about himself than he had in years. He realized how much he had learned to rely on routines and habits, how much comfort he had found in solitude, and how deeply he had missed genuine connection. Her presence did not feel intrusive. It felt natural, as though the house and his life had been waiting for this moment of reconnection. It was a delicate balance, learning to share space after so long, but one that brought immense satisfaction. There were moments of reflection as well. Alone in his thoughts, he sometimes pondered the 10 years he had spent in isolation, the choices he had made, the people he had kept at a distance, and the life he had led quietly. He realized that while solitude had taught him resilience, patience, and self-awareness, it had also left gaps, moments he had missed, and experiences he had never shared. Being with her highlighted these gaps, but also offered an opportunity to fill them, to reconnect with life in ways he had long neglected. The small joys of daily life became moments of celebration. Preparing a simple meal together was no longer mundane. It was a shared experience that brought satisfaction and warmth. Walking through the market, exchanging greetings with familiar shopkeepers, became a social adventure, a reminder that life outside the house still held surprises and connections waiting to be discovered. Every day was an opportunity to create memories, to build a life that felt richer and more vibrant than the quiet existence he had known for so long. They also shared moments of silence, sitting together without speaking, yet feeling fully understood. These quiet times were just as important as their conversations, for they allowed him to recognize that companionship was not only about words but also about presence, support, and mutual understanding. She understood his need for space and reflection, and he began to appreciate the gentle balance between togetherness and independence. Over time, he noticed small changes in his own behavior and perspective. He felt more patient, more willing to take small risks, like inviting her to explore the hidden trails he loved, or trying out new recipes they could cook together. He laughed more easily, spoke more openly, and found joy in the smallest details: the smell of fresh bread, the sight of flowers blooming in the garden, the sound of birds singing outside the window. These details, once overlooked, now carried significance because they were shared experiences. Her influence on his life was subtle but profound. She reminded him that life was not meant to be lived in isolation, that connections, even small ones, could bring meaning and joy. She inspired him to see beauty in routine, to cherish small acts of kindness, and to approach each day with renewed curiosity. Through her, he began to reimagine what life could be, recognizing that the years of solitude had not been wasted, but had prepared him to fully embrace companionship and friendship when the right person came along. Evenings grew longer as they shared stories from the past, revealing experiences, memories, and lessons learned. They spoke of childhood, family, and the paths that had shaped them. These conversations created bonds, a deepening trust that allowed him to feel safe opening up completely.
He realized that the years of silence had heightened his appreciation for meaningful dialogue, making every exchange more valuable and memorable.
Days turned into weeks, and the initial novelty of her presence settled into a comfortable routine. Yet there was always a sense of excitement, a feeling that something new could happen at any moment. Even small gestures, a shared cup of tea, a gentle conversation at sunset, a spontaneous laugh over a minor mishap, felt significant. Life was no longer a series of repetitive, quiet days. It had become a tapestry of experiences woven together with care, warmth, and understanding. Through it all, he remained grateful for the opportunity to reconnect with another human being. He learned that companionship was not about grand gestures or constant activity. It was about being present, listening, sharing, and simply existing together. Her presence reminded him that life was richer when shared, and that the moments of loneliness he had endured were not permanent. They had prepared him to fully appreciate the value of connection when it arrived. By the end of the second part of their journey together, he felt a sense of balance he had never known. He could enjoy silence without feeling lonely, share stories without feeling vulnerable, and embrace companionship without losing his sense of self. The long years of isolation had taught him resilience, and the arrival of her presence had taught him joy. Together they were building a new rhythm, a life that honored both solitude and friendship, reflection and connection, quiet contemplation and shared laughter. As weeks turned into months, he began to notice how much her presence had changed his life, in ways both big and small. The house that had been quiet and still for so many years now felt alive, not just with conversation, but with a sense of purpose. Every corner seemed brighter, every room warmer. Even the small garden outside seemed to flourish more, as if reflecting the light that had returned to his life. He found himself smiling more, laughing more easily, and noticing the little joys that he had overlooked during his long years of solitude. They had developed a rhythm to their days, one that suited both of them. Mornings began with soft sunlight streaming through the windows, the smell of freshly brewed tea, and quiet conversations about the plans for the day. He had learned to wake up with a sense of anticipation, something he hadn't felt in years. The knowledge that someone else would share his day, even in simple ways, made life feel fuller. She often suggested small activities, taking a walk along the river, visiting the local market, or simply sitting in the garden and observing the world around them. These moments, though ordinary, became extraordinary simply because they were shared. In these months, he discovered that living alone had given him certain strengths: patience, self-reflection, and independence. But he also realized that it had left gaps in companionship, in shared laughter, and in the comfort of having someone to lean on. With her around, those gaps began to fill. Conversations were no longer one-sided. He could talk about his fears, his past regrets, and his hopes for the future without hesitation. And she, in turn, shared her own experiences, creating a bond rooted in trust and understanding. One afternoon they decided to clean the attic, a place he had long avoided. It was filled with old boxes, dusty books, and forgotten memories. As they sorted through the items together, he found himself laughing at old photographs and recalling stories from his past. She listened attentively, often asking questions that made him think about the moments he had almost forgotten. It was not just about cleaning the attic. It was about rediscovering parts of himself that had been hidden away for years. Every object they touched seemed to carry a story, and every story strengthened the connection between them. Life outside the house also became more vibrant. Together, they would walk through the streets of the town, greeting neighbors, visiting local shops, and observing the simple rhythms of everyday life. He had once avoided these interactions, feeling awkward or disconnected. But with her by his side, the world seemed less intimidating. The streets, once familiar but distant, now felt like a place of opportunity for shared experiences. He noticed small gestures of kindness, like a shopkeeper offering a friendly smile or a child waving as they passed. These moments, though fleeting, felt meaningful because he was experiencing them with someone else. Evenings were often the most reflective part of their day. They would sit by the fireplace or by the window, the fading light creating a warm glow. Sometimes they would talk, sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. He realized that companionship did not always require words. Sitting together, feeling the quiet comfort of shared space was enough. These moments taught him that true connection could be simple, and that the presence of another person could bring peace and fulfillment without the need for constant conversation or activity. There were challenges, of course. Living with someone after so many years of solitude required adjustments. He had become accustomed to doing things on his own schedule, making decisions independently, and maintaining complete control over his environment. Now he had to consider another person's preferences, habits, and feelings. At first, this was difficult. He occasionally found himself irritated over small things. A dish left in the sink, a book misplaced, or a change in routine. But over time he learned patience, compromise, and the value of flexibility. These challenges, rather than causing friction, strengthened their bond, teaching him that living together meant understanding, empathy, and cooperation.
She, too, learned from him.
She admired his self-discipline, his ability to maintain order in his life, and his reflective nature. She began to appreciate the quiet moments, the thoughtful pauses, and the attention he gave to small details. Together they found a balance, her energy complementing his calm, her curiosity encouraging his openness, and his patience providing stability. Their differences, instead of causing tension, created harmony as each learned from the other and grew in unexpected ways. One day, while walking through a quiet park, he reflected on the changes in his life. The loneliness that had once defined him now felt distant, replaced by a sense of belonging and connection. He realized that the past 10 years, though difficult, had prepared him for this moment. They had taught him resilience, self-awareness, and the value of reflection. But more importantly, they had made him recognize the importance of human connection, the kind that brings warmth, understanding, and mutual support. They began to plan small projects together. They planted new flowers in the garden, rearranged the furniture, and even started a little bookshelf for his writings, where they could display the stories he had once kept hidden. Each project was an opportunity to collaborate, to share ideas, and to create something meaningful together. He discovered that working alongside someone he trusted brought a sense of satisfaction far greater than working alone. These shared accomplishments became symbols of their growing bond, a testament to the power of connection after years of isolation. Over time, he noticed that he had changed in subtle but profound ways. Desperate, he laughed more freely, felt emotions more deeply, and approached life with renewed curiosity. He was no longer afraid of sharing his thoughts, nor was he hesitant to experience joy. The simple acts of cooking together, taking walks, and sharing stories had transformed him, showing that life, when shared, could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful. The presence of another person also allowed him to see himself more clearly, reflected on the mistakes and regrets of his past, understanding that isolation had both shielded him and limited him. He acknowledged the moments of fear and hesitation that had kept him from reaching out to others, and he resolved to embrace life more fully. Her presence reminded him that the world was larger than his solitude, filled with opportunities for growth, understanding, and companionship.
Even during quiet, reflective moments, he felt a deep sense of gratitude.
The long years of living alone had taught him patience and self-reliance, but her arrival had shown him the beauty of shared experiences. He began to recognize that life's value was not just in surviving or enduring, but in connecting, learning, and building meaningful relationships. These lessons, once theoretical, became real through their daily interactions and shared experiences. As part 3 of their journey unfolded, he found himself planning for the future in ways he had never imagined. He considered small trips, community activities, and ways to bring more life into their home. He imagined a life where solitude and companionship could coexist, where moments of reflection were balanced with moments of shared joy. This vision gave him a renewed sense of purpose, a reason to continue growing, learning, and embracing the richness of life. Through it all, the bond between them deepened. Trust, understanding, and respect formed the foundation of their relationship. By He realized that true companionship was not about constant excitement or grand gestures, but about the quiet moments, the shared routines, and the gentle reassurance of knowing someone is there. In his home, but a part of his life, a presence that brought stability, joy, and meaning. By the end of this phase, he understood that the journey of reconnecting with another person was gradual, requiring patience, openness, and vulnerability. Yet it was worth every challenge, every adjustment, and every moment of reflection. Life had returned to him in a way he had never expected, showing him that even after years of solitude, it was possible to build bonds that were deep, meaningful, and transformative. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, but with her presence, he realized that comfort did not mean stagnation. Every day brought something new, sometimes small, sometimes unexpected, that encouraged him to look beyond the walls of his home and consider life in a broader way. He began to feel a sense of curiosity about the world again, a curiosity that had lain dormant during his long years of solitude. Even simple tasks like visiting the market or walking through the park now felt like opportunities to explore, observe, and engage with life in ways he had almost forgotten. They started to share responsibilities in the house more consciously. Cooking, cleaning, and gardening became joint efforts, each bringing their own style and ideas to the tasks. He had once managed everything alone, but now he discovered the joy of teamwork. Preparing a meal together was no longer a mundane chore. It became a way to talk, laugh, and learn about each other's preferences and habits. She suggested new recipes, while he added his own touches from past experiences. Through these small collaborations, he realized that living with someone was not just about companionship. It was also about growth, compromise, and mutual respect. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs in the attic, they stumbled upon images from his childhood. He had not looked at these photos in years, and seeing them again brought a flood of memories, some joyful, some bittersweet. He shared stories about his early life, his family, and the events that had shaped him into the person he had become. She listened attentively, asking questions and offering reflections that made him see his past from new perspectives. The process of revisiting these memories together deepened their connection, reminding him that sharing one's history could create understanding, empathy, and trust. Their walks outside the house became more adventurous. Instead of the familiar routes he had taken for years, she encouraged him to explore new areas, the neighboring towns, quiet trails in the woods, and scenic spots along the river. These trips, small as they might have seemed, were transformative. He had been living in a bubble of routine for so long, but now he was rediscovering the beauty of the world and the pleasure of shared experiences. Every new sight and sound became more vivid because it was experienced together. He realized that life, when shared, had a richness that solitude alone could never provide. During these months, he also began to reflect on the emotional changes within himself. He noticed that he was more open, more willing to express his thoughts and feelings. The loneliness that had once defined him no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it was a reference point, showing him how much he had grown. He recognized that his solitude had been necessary, giving him the ability to appreciate companionship fully when it arrived. Now, with her in his life, he found a balance between independence and connection, solitude and shared moments. They also discovered the value of quiet evenings together.
Not every moment needed activity or conversation.
Sometimes they would sit in the garden or by the window, watching the world slowly change from day to night. The sound of rustling leaves, distant voices, and chirping birds became part of a shared atmosphere, creating a sense of peace and belonging. These evenings taught him that companionship was not about filling every moment with words or actions, but about presence, simply being there for each other silently, yet meaningfully. Over time, they began to plan for the future in small, thoughtful ways. He realized that he wanted to experience life more fully, to build memories and adventures that could be shared and remembered. Together, They made lists of places to visit, books to read, and projects to undertake around the house. Each plan, whether big or small, brought a sense of anticipation and excitement, a feeling that life was once again full of possibilities. The idea of a shared future, once foreign to him, became something he looked forward to with hope and enthusiasm. But too, challenges continued to appear as they naturally do in any shared life. Occasionally, disagreements arose over simple matters, a schedule, a preference, or a small miscommunication. At first, these moments felt uncomfortable, but they quickly learned to handle them with patience and understanding. Each challenge became a lesson in empathy and compromise, teaching him that relationships required effort, attention, and care. Through these experiences, he grew not only as a companion but also as an individual, learning to navigate the complexities of life with grace and maturity. During these months, he also revisited his writing more seriously. Her presence inspired him to write with renewed passion and perspective. He began documenting their experiences together, not as a mere diary, but as a record of lessons learned, emotions felt, and moments cherished. Break. Writing became a shared activity at times. She would read his drafts, offer feedback, and encourage him to explore ideas he had previously set aside. This collaboration brought him joy, motivation, and a renewed sense of purpose. His creativity, long dormant in isolation, flourished under the influence of companionship and shared encouragement.
Even small traditions they created together became significant. Sunday afternoons were reserved for walks in the countryside, evenings for cooking special meals, and quiet mornings for reading aloud to each other.
These routines, though simple, became anchors in their lives, providing stability, comfort, and connection.
He realized that meaningful life was not built solely on grand gestures, but on consistent, thoughtful actions shared with someone who cared.
Through their shared experiences, he began to understand the subtle but profound impact of human connection. He had once believed that independence was the ultimate goal, that solitude was preferable to dependency. But now he understood that true strength lay in the ability to balance self-reliance with openness to others. His life had gained depth and color, and he had discovered that emotional intimacy, trust, and shared joy could coexist with personal freedom. They also spent time helping others in small ways. Occasionally, they would visit neighbors, assist in local community projects, or share meals with those in need. These experiences taught him empathy and perspective, reminding him that life extended beyond the walls of their home. They realized that part of living fully was contributing to the lives of others, spreading kindness and understanding, and learning from the broader world around them. These acts, though modest, strengthened their bond and enriched their lives in ways that words alone could not capture. Throughout part 4 of their journey, he noticed a transformation in himself that went beyond daily routines and activities. He felt emotionally stronger, more self-aware, and more connected to the world. He recognized that the years of solitude had been a period of preparation, giving him the resilience, patience, and clarity needed to fully embrace companionship.
Yet it was the shared experiences, laughter, challenges, and quiet moments that truly shaped his growth.
By this stage, he had developed a deep appreciation for the value of partnership. Life was no longer a series of lonely, repetitive days, but a tapestry of shared experiences, reflections, and small joys. He saw how every interaction, every conversation, and every project contributed to a sense of belonging, trust, and emotional fulfillment. He realized that connection was not a luxury but a vital part of a meaningful life, and that it could bring happiness, growth, and purpose beyond anything he had experienced alone.
As part 4 drew to a close, he felt a sense of confidence in the life they were building together.
He had come to understand that true companionship was about mutual respect, shared experiences, and the ability to grow alongside another person. He had learned patience, empathy, and resilience, and he now embraced life with renewed hope, curiosity, and joy. The long years of solitude had taught him the value of reflection and self-reliance, but the months of shared living had shown him that life's richest moments were meant to be experienced together, with trust, understanding, and care. The months had passed quickly, and he began to realize how much his life had transformed. The house that had once been silent and still now resonated with warmth, laughter, and shared memories. Even the small garden outside seemed to flourish, mirroring the growth that had taken place within him. He could hardly remember the man he had been 10 years ago, quiet, isolated, and hesitant to let anyone into his life. But now he felt more alive, more present, and more connected to the world around him. He and she had developed a rhythm that felt natural and comforting. Mornings were filled with shared tea and conversation. Afternoons were for walks and small adventures, and evenings were for quiet reflection or storytelling. Each day was predictable yet exciting, because the moments were shared, and even ordinary activities became special when experienced together. He had come to appreciate the beauty of routine that included another person, realizing that companionship could enhance life in ways solitude never could.
Through all this, he noticed a profound change in himself.
His emotional life had deepened. He laughed more freely, felt joy more fully, and even handled challenges with patience and understanding he had never known before. She had taught him that life was not just about enduring or surviving, but about connecting, sharing, and creating meaning with others. Even simple gestures, like a smile, a shared meal, or a walk together, carried weight and significance. They reminded him that life's richest experiences often came from the everyday moments that are shared with someone who cares. He also reflected on the lessons of the past 10 years. Living alone had taught him resilience, independence, and self-reliance. Those years had given him time to think, to understand himself, and to prepare emotionally for the return of human connection. But the months since she arrived had taught him something equally important, that life is not meant to be lived in isolation. Relationships, trust, and shared experiences were what brought depth, color, and purpose to his existence. He realized that solitude had value, but connection gave life its full meaning. One afternoon, as they were organizing his writings in the study, he paused and looked at her. She was carefully arranging his notebooks, gently brushing off dust, and occasionally laughing softly at notes she found amusing or interesting. Watching her, he felt a surge of gratitude and warmth. He remembered the long years of silence and solitude, and understood how far he had come. No one he had once thought of as his safe, quiet life now seemed incomplete without the laughter, companionship, and understanding that she brought into his days. Their bond had grown deeper through shared experiences and small acts of kindness. Whether it was preparing a meal together, planting flowers in the garden, or simply sitting in the quiet of the evening. Every action had strengthened their connection. They had learned to anticipate each other's needs, respect each other's space, and support one another without needing words. He realized that true companionship was not just about grand gestures or constant conversation, but about presence, patience, and mutual understanding. They began to make plans for the future with excitement and optimism. Simple ideas, like planting a vegetable garden, redecorating the house, or taking small trips to nearby towns, became shared goals.
Each project brought them closer together and added new layers of joy to their lives. He discovered that collaborating with someone he trusted and cared for was not only satisfying but also inspiring.
Their shared efforts created tangible results, but more importantly, they created shared memories that he would treasure for the rest of his life.
He also felt inspired to reconnect with the wider world.
Before, he had avoided social events and interactions, preferring the comfort of his isolated routine. Now, he found courage in her support and curiosity. Together, they visited neighbors, attended small community gatherings, and even helped with local events. These experiences, while modest, reminded him that life extended beyond the walls of his home, and that shared experiences with both loved ones and the community brought a deeper sense of fulfillment. Through all these experiences, he noticed a change in how he perceived himself. He no longer saw his past solitude as a failure or a limitation. He recognized it as a necessary stage of growth that had prepared him to embrace connection fully. He had learned patience, reflection, and self-discipline, but more importantly, he had learned to value companionship. He now understood that human connection was not a threat to independence, but a complement to it, a way to enrich life. The seasons changed, and with them the small rituals they had created together evolved. Winters were spent by the fireplace reading aloud or sharing stories, while summers were for gardening and walks in the park. Spring brought the joy of flowers blooming in the garden they had nurtured together, and autumn brought quiet afternoons of reflection and gratitude. Through every season he felt a profound sense of harmony, a balance between his need for reflection and the joy of shared experiences. Evenings became moments of reflection and planning, but also of celebration. They would talk about the past, appreciating the journey that had led them to this point. He would share stories from his solitary years, while she would recount her own experiences, creating a rich tapestry of memories and understanding. These conversations deepened their bond and allowed him to see that life was most meaningful when shared, when lessons learned and joys experienced could be exchanged with someone who cared. One particularly quiet evening, he realized something important. He had spent a decade living alone, believing that solitude was enough for him. But now he understood that life was meant to be experienced in connection with others. The laughter, shared stories, gentle conversations, and simple daily interactions had brought meaning, joy, and growth that he could never have achieved alone. Solitude had given him clarity and strength, but companionship had given him life. He also began to recognize the importance of mutual support. She had been there for him in ways large and small, helping him rediscover joy, encouraging him to explore new ideas, and simply being present. In turn, he had been able to provide her with a sense of comfort, stability, and partnership. Together, they had created a relationship built on trust, understanding, and shared experiences. A relationship that celebrated both individuality and togetherness. As the final months of this chapter unfolded, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned during his years of solitude, for the presence of someone who had entered his life unexpectedly, and for the opportunity to rebuild his world in a way that felt meaningful and joyful. He understood that life was not about perfection or constant excitement. It was about growth, connection, and the quiet moments that shape the heart.
In the evenings, as they sat together watching the sun set over the horizon, he often reflected on how far he had come.
The man who had once feared loneliness and shunned connection had now discovered the true value of companionship. He had learned that life's richest experiences were not measured by achievements or material possessions, but by the relationships, trust, and shared moments that gave life depth and meaning. He also recognized the lasting impact of patience and openness. Without the time spent in reflection and solitude, he would not have been ready to embrace the depth of connection she brought into his life. The years alone had prepared him to fully appreciate what was happening now. The laughter, the shared adventures, the quiet moments, and the sense of belonging that had become central to his existence.
By the end of this part of his journey, he felt whole in a way he had never known before.
Life was no longer a series of quiet, repetitive days. It was a rich, vibrant experience filled with meaning, joy, and connection. The house that had once been a refuge of solitude had become a home of warmth, trust, and companionship. Every corner, every window, every garden path now held memories of shared laughter, thoughtful conversation, and small acts of kindness. He realized that the journey from solitude to connection had not been easy, but it had been worth every moment. The years of living alone had taught him resilience and self-awareness, and her presence had shown him the beauty of shared life. Together they had built something lasting, not just a home, but a life filled with meaning, understanding, and the quiet joy of knowing that they were no longer alone. As he looked ahead, he felt hope, curiosity, and gratitude. Life, once silent and still, was now full of possibilities. He understood that the richness of human experience comes from both reflection and connection, solitude and companionship, quiet contemplation and shared laughter. He had discovered that the heart could expand, grow, and embrace life fully even after years of isolation. In the final moments of Part 5, he felt at peace. He had learned that life was about balance, between self-reliance and openness, between reflection and action, between solitude and shared experiences. And above all, he understood that the greatest gift of all was the presence of someone who cared, someone with whom he could share the ordinary and the extraordinary, the quiet moments and the adventures, the laughter and the lessons. Burst. Together, they had created a life that was full, meaningful, and rich in ways he had never imagined possible.